On a recorded telephone call in January 1991, a woman begged her girlfriend not to let the police take her away. "I love you," she said. "If I have to confess everything just to keep you from getting in trouble, I will." The woman on the other end of that call was crying too, but her tears were serving a different purpose. She had already made a deal with the police, her freedom in exchange for a confession. Within minutes, Aileen Wuornos gave investigators everything they needed to send her to death row, because the one person she trusted completely was working for the other side the entire time. If you enjoyed this, a subscribe, bell notification, or comment means the world. It helps the channel grow and keeps me digging up more stories for you. Aileen Wuornos was born in Michigan in 1956 to a 16-year-old mother who left before she turned 4. Her biological father, a man she never met, ended his own life in prison years later. She was raised instead by her grandparents, and by all accounts, it was not a happy home. She later described those years as the root of everything that came after. A childhood she said she would not wish on anyone. She left home as a teenager with nothing and nowhere to go. Before she was even old enough to drive, she had already given birth once and lost the child to adoption. Her grandmother died. Her grandfather sent her away. By 15, Aileen Wuornos was living alone in the woods outside a small Michigan town, already fending for herself in a world that had offered her no other way to survive. She drifted for years through a string of arrests for theft, forgery, and assault, working the highways of Central Florida as a sex worker who met her clients in truck stops and roadside bars. In 1986, she met a 24-year-old woman named Tyria Moore at a gay bar in Daytona Beach, and the two moved in together almost immediately. Moore lived off the money Wuornos brought home, money that increasingly came not just from sex work, but from pawning items belonging to men who had picked her up on the highway and never made it home again. Between late 1989 and late 1990, 7 middle-aged men who stopped for Aileen Wuornos on a Florida road were later found shot dead in the woods off the highway, their cars stolen or abandoned nearby. Wuornos would later claim, and continued to claim for years afterward, that the first killing was self-defense, that Richard Mallory, her first victim, had violently raped her before she shot him. Here is what the jury never properly heard. Mallory had already served 10 years in prison for a violent rape in another state. Investigators somehow failed to uncover it before trial, but the killings that followed did not fit a pattern of self-defense. They fit a pattern of robbery. Cars stolen, wallets emptied, personal items sold at local pawn shops for cash, the paper trail of a woman running out of options and running out of time. By late 1990, composite sketches based on witness descriptions were circulating across Florida news broadcasts, and detectives had matched fingerprints from an abandoned vehicle to a woman with a long arrest record under 2 names, Aileen Wuornos and Lee Blavek. Once investigators identified Wuornos, they needed a confession, and they knew exactly how to get one. Tyria Moore was brought in, offered full immunity from prosecution in exchange for her cooperation, and police recorded a phone call between the 2 women in January 1991 while Wuornos was already under surveillance. On that call, Moore pretended to be terrified of being arrested herself, pushing Wuornos again and again to explain what had really happened. Wuornos, desperate to protect the one person she believed loved her, began confessing to murder after murder over the phone, unaware that every word was being captured on tape for the prosecution that would later use it to send her to death row. Wuornos was arrested days later at a biker bar called The Last Resort. She never saw Tyria Moore again outside of a courtroom, where Moore appeared as a prosecution witness and testified against the woman who had spent years protecting her. The trial in January 1992 lasted barely a week. Wuornos was convicted of first-degree murder for Richard Mallory's death and sentenced to death. Rather than fight the remaining charges, she pleaded no contest to 5 more murders, receiving 5 additional death sentences, and was never tried for a 7th alleged killing because the victim's body was never recovered. For the next decade, she sat on death row at Florida's Broward Correctional Institution, her mental state visibly deteriorating, convinced at various points that prison staff were poisoning her food and that guards were monitoring her thoughts. In 2001, she formally dropped all remaining appeals and demanded her own execution, writing to the Florida Supreme Court that she was sane, competent, and finished pretending otherwise. 3 court-appointed psychiatrists agreed she was fit to die. Governor Jeb Bush signed her death warrant in the summer of 2002. On the morning of October 9, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was offered a final meal worth up to $20, anything she wanted from the prison kitchen. She declined all of it and asked for a single cup of black coffee instead. She was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison at 9:47 that morning, only the second woman put to death by the state of Florida since the reinstatement of capital punishment. Her final words referenced returning on a spaceship with Jesus, a statement later reporting suggested revealed just how far her mental state had deteriorated. Tyria Moore, the woman whose recorded phone call convicted her, went on to sell her version of events to journalists and documentary producers for years afterward, profiting from a story that began with a promise never to let Aileen go to jail. In 2003, Charlize Theron won an Academy Award playing Aileen Wuornos in a film called Monster. Nobody watching it in theaters ever heard the sound of Tyria Moore's voice on that recorded call, quietly building the case that would end Aileen Wuornos' life. My name is George, and this is Echoes from the Cell.